basics. So I don't know if I can do that or not. You know, there's, for you people who know something about CJ things, one thing that criminal justice people did, is a criminal justice theorist that came up with this notion that there are first-timers and repeaters in the criminal justice system. And so for the first-timers, I'm very sympathetic to you, and I especially welcome you to these conferences, and we hope that you come back. 3 years from now, we're going to return to presidents. If you look at the last page in the booklet, the call for papers is already out 3 years from now, dealing with Harry Truman and Eisenhower both. And then there's you people who are the repeaters, you know, who are the equivalent of criminals, who learn how to play the game, and, you know, you're at advantage to these innocent sorts that have never committed a crime or anything. And I would emphasize that a lot, except you may not like that. And worse than that, you repeat players. There's about 2/3 of you who are repeat players, and I owe a lot to you. Many of you, I'm in total gratitude to you because you've made this conference series, and in many different ways. And I appreciate that. So thank you. And we hope that you come back in another 3 years, and we'll just start off with the first panel. The moderator is Laura McLemore, who is an archivist, a PhD in history, and she's a walking encyclopedia, and I'll just turn things over to her.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here today. And we're going to start off with the beginning, the beginning plus, in fact, talking about great legislators and legislation in the early republic. Our first presenter is John Bailey, Jr. with Centenary College of Louisiana, who's going to talk to us about John Jay. John Jay, as many of you know, is best known to us probably as co-author of The Federalist, an American diplomat, Supreme Court Justice, and negotiator of Jay's Treaty in 1794 that was so unpopular he claimed he could walk across the country in the light of burning effigies of himself. But little is widely known about his involvement in state legislation as U.S. Secretary of Foreign Affairs under the Articles of Confederation. The experience surely had a profound effect on his thinking, as the frustrations he suffered in that role convinced him of the need for a more powerful government and led him to actively pursue ratification of the U.S. Constitution in New York and to join Hamilton and Madison in arguing for popular support of the new system of government. Mr. Bailey will shed new light on this transformative period in Jay's long and distinguished career in his paper, John Jay and the Promotion of State Legislative Intercession During the Confederation Period. John W. Bailey, Jr. began his college teaching career in 1977 as an English professor at a small Midwestern university. Well, I don't know, I have a degree in English too. Nothing to be ashamed of.
I wasn't ashamed of it, I just didn't want to.
Since 1992, he has taught history at both Centenary College of Louisiana and Louisiana State University in Shreveport, specializing in early national American history and Renaissance Europe. Mr. Bailey?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. McLemore. And in fact, after your introduction, I feel like I really don't have to give this paper. You pretty well have covered it. One thing I might mention, a couple of introductory comments, is that some of the information I'm giving here, it struck me when I was putting this thing together that I had to repeat some of the background information on Jay that I gave when I gave a different paper on John Jay and his relationship with George Washington during the Washington Conference that Dr. Peterson put on several years ago. I don't remember what year it was. It must have been, seems like it was before the Punic Wars. Pardon?
2000.
2000, yeah. So those of you who were here in 2000, you've heard this stuff before probably, and those are eidetic memories. I'm sorry that I have to repeat it, but really it is a little bit different. I first got the idea of doing research on this period of John Jay's career when in graduate school, when my advisor Lawrence S. Kaplan told me one day that he'd like to see me work on this because there had been a lot of research done on John Jay's career during the time that he was Secretary for Foreign Affairs under the Articles of Confederation. The more I got into it, I kind of felt like oftentimes I was holding sand in my fist. The harder I squeezed, the more it came out, and I always kind of wondered what I had. But it turns out that I've discovered several different things, not only about his yearning for a constitution, but how much effect he had on bringing the original founders, the first-line founders, back into the game, if you will, to help sort of, he constantly Jay was eschewing the Articles of Confederation in favor of some sort of constitution. He was, especially toward the end of 1786, beginning of 1787, he was really doing a lot of nagging through his letters. But let me go ahead and start at the beginning. From December 21st, 1784 until March 22nd, 1790, John Jay held perhaps the most significant position in the newly formed Confederation government of the United States. He arrived in New York in late 1784 after a respite in England following the Paris peace negotiations, which he helped to conclude in 1783. Upon returning to his home in New York, Jay immediately received the news that Congress had appointed him to the position of Secretary for Foreign Affairs, following the resignation of Robert R. Livingston, his good friend. And what he didn't know at the time was that Livingston was the one who really put him up for the job that Livingston wanted out. As head for foreign relations, Jay soon transformed his newly acquired position from an appurtenance of Congress to the most influential post in the entire government, which closely resembled the role of the national executive. Although this accomplishment was difficult, it was not as implausible as it might have seemed. As a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar, the Articles of Confederation established some vital administrative positions, including President of Congress, Secretary of Finance, as well as Secretary for Foreign Affairs. Nevertheless, the Articles did not even place minimal emphasis upon a comprehensive administrative position. The final draft of the Articles stripped the central government of its sovereignty in favor of the states. There was virtually no executive power aside from Congress. To compensate for the lack of central authority, Jay made full use of his official prerogatives, placing himself as an arbiter, not only between Congress and foreign countries, but also between Congress and the states. Through this adaptation, he became the veritable lead executive of the Confederation. Whether tacitly or deliberately, most people view the United States founding membership as having at least two tiers. The first tier, of course, consists of those figures who are readily distinguishable by their names and their corresponding deeds that people generally regard as critically, if not heroically, important. Names such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison are commonly associated with the roster of elite founders. Furthermore, there was a seeming multitude of contributing participants from the Revolutionary and early national periods whose names by degree remain obscure or less recognizable to most people, perhaps other than historians of early America. Names such as Elbridge Gerry, Charles Pinckney, and Gouverneur Morris may ring familiar to some people, yet their notable deeds ordinarily cannot be recounted, relegating them to a secondary tier of founders. Then there's John Jay, whose case appears to defy such typical categorization. Jay's role as a leading collaborator in the formation of the American Republic tends to hover between the top and lower designations in early national America. In effect, Jay retains a marked amount of name recognition. A cursory look at any survey text or reference manual pertaining to the initial phases of American history will find him participating, as you pointed out, will find him participating in nearly every pivotal interlude between 1774 and 1800. However, there is little in his array of accomplishments which can be considered sensational fodder for heroic promotion. He did not share the battlefield exploits of George Washington or Alexander Hamilton. He did not compose any tracts or make any speeches that endure as an elegant benchmark of political prose. Perhaps similar to Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry. Conversely, Jay extended himself with unremitting diligence by taking on assignments that were critically important to the success of the young republic, although these tasks often offered negligible returns in glamour or historical reverence. Regardless of the rigorous and routine nature inherent in these duties, particularly President of the new Confederation Congress at the outset of the Revolution, Minister to Spain, delegate to the Paris peace talks, which he nearly had a nervous breakdown over, because he felt like, and that's true, he was the only one that was consistently on the job during those negotiations. Secretary for Foreign Affairs and First Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and again, as Dr. McLemore pointed out, negotiator of the Jay Treaty, starting in 1793 and concluding the treaty in 1794, which was largely a last gasp effort to remove the British from the Northwest Territories so that the settlers could begin to manifest destiny. And as Dr. McLemore pointed out, Jay was reviled because he did exactly what Washington told him to do. Washington sent him to England Britain to get the treaty. He got it, but Washington also said, by the way, if you can get any trade concessions, any little nuggets that the British want to give us, that'd be great. Somehow that made it into the popular press that Jay was going to go over there and really come back with the goods. Jay came back with a treaty. And yeah, he was reviled. In fact, my favorite story is one that some of you I'm sure have heard before. There was a lot of graffiti put up about Jay. And in Boston, there was particularly on a lot of fences written, "Damn John Jay," and "Damn all those who will not damn John Jay." And this was his last great insertion into national politics. By all accounts, Jay had not planned to remain in government service after completing the negotiations for the 1783 Treaty of Paris, which included the Revolutionary War. Rather, he looked forward to returning home in order to resume his private law practice and devote more time to his family. Jay's intention for his homecoming were in a letter that he wrote to Robert R. Livingston, his close friend and predecessor. And Jay said, "When I resign my appointments in Europe, I propose to return to the practice of law. What effect the unexpected offer of Congress may have on that design remains undecided. How far either of us have been or may be under the influence of ambition are questions which, however clear to ourselves, must necessarily be less so to others." Jay was constantly evaluating his own public objectivity. Although this statement clearly demonstrates that Jay had anticipated a different lifestyle for his return to New York than the one Congress had prepared for him, the most revealing portion of this missive is the closing remark that refers to personal ambition. Even Frank Monahan, who wrote the first full biography of Jay, did not attribute much significance to this allusion, beyond the fact that Jay responded to a comment by Livingston, who had previously written to the Secretary-designate concerning Jay's unsolicited appointment. In this letter, Livingston simply informed Jay that personal ambition is the principal ingredient for success as Secretary for Foreign Affairs. Jay didn't really agree with that. Monahan dismisses Jay's reply to his assertion as nothing more than the rationalization of a persistent man of ambition. Moreover, other American historians, including Samuel Flagg Bemis and Richard B. Morris, stipulate that the fundamental flaw in Jay's character stemmed from an overactive ego. Certainly no one doubted that Jay had a strong sense of his own self-esteem. Still, it was unfair to relegate Jay's introspection about personal ambition to the level of mere rationalization. Even though Livingston broached the subject, Jay's concern about the extent of his personal ambition and its outward appearance indicate an intellectually conscientious nature, which was no menial attribute for a man who was chosen by popular demand to hold the most crucial positions in the Confederation Period. I didn't do a lot of historiography and philosophical background of the 18th century here. I'm not going to weigh you down with that, but I'd like to point out a couple of things that Jay was, as I say here, Jay was essentially the embodiment of an Enlightenment era intellectual worker. He was not spectacular in what he did, just as Alexander Pope and Isaac Newton were not spectacular. But yet, like these figures, he was analytical, imaginative, and industrious. Among his biographers, Monahan carefully undergirds his discussion of Jay's rational efficacy by crediting the influential elements of his Calvinist Huguenot ancestry. partially with respect to the personality traits such as focus, perseverance, and ethical incisiveness. Plus, again, Jay's reluctance to seek any kind of publicity, I think, stems from his Calvinist Huguenot background as well. Walter Starr, Jay's most recent biographer, gives no interpretive weight to his Calvinist lineage. He attributes the inception of Jay's diligence and sagacity to the conditioning he absorbed at Anglican boarding school. I have to talk a lot of Paul about that one. More importantly, however, Jay was versatile enough to apply these qualities as he endeavored to keep the United States viable as it sputtered along during the Confederation. Monahan and Starr converged with their views of his life that as a trained man of letters, Jay reflected the values of the English Enlightenment, Augustan thinker, pervasively oriented around the works of John Locke. Accordingly, sophisticated citizens like Jay himself shared a new version of humanistic ethics. 18th century society no longer accepted the self-serving humanistic expediency that led to the religious and civic chaos of the late Renaissance. Instead, empirical humanism, as couched by Locke, indicates that individuals are born with a fundamental capacity for benevolence or good, depending upon their formative experience. As a result, people are capable of controlling their own destinies without authoritarian interference. For Jay, this meant that authority becomes the innate responsibility of the individual. Each individual owes his success to his own autonomy and his moral balance to his own autonomy as well. The need for a rational person to adhere to this type of introspection is encapsulated by Samuel Johnson, the standard bearer of English Enlightenment, in the following manner. To these profound principles of natural knowledge are added some moral instructions equally new. The self-interest, well understood, will produce social concord that men are mutual gainers by mutual benefits. By applying Johnson's summation as a code of reference to the 18th century intellectual, then Jay's comments to Livingston about personal ambition can be interpreted as a reflection of this code. Ultimately, Jay imparts that he was aware of the degree to which he is influenced by ambition, and in Jay's case, this awareness is symptomatic of a larger facility toward objective humanism. What I'm building toward here is why Jay wanted to hassle, as he did, with so many small things, especially where the state legislators and state governments were concerned. As I've already mentioned, Jay accepted crucial public service posts that were important to the triumph of the Republic and that demanded someone of great acumen while affording little or no public adoration or personal aggrandizement. In a letter to Robert Morris, the Congressional Finance Director, Jay imparts a sort of service dedication as the core test for the truly enlightened individual. According to the various positions that Jay held, none is more essential to the survival of the new nation than the office of Secretary for Foreign Affairs under the Confederation. This assignment was particularly critical largely because of the endemic flaws in the articles and because the most pernicious problems confronting the political and economic substances of the United States were basically diplomatic. The articles were deficient in fundamental elements of federal cohesion. With no provision for executive oversight, no centralized accommodations for those offices or services that unified nations find indispensable, namely federal military, national currency, federal courts, national taxation, and national treaty power. Congruently, grave foreign policy discord with Britain, France, and Spain exposed these to domestic failure. Jay's belief that foreign policy was, you couldn't make a separation between the success of the articles and the foreign policy problems that the United States was facing, freshly out of the war with England, now having a rather truculent relationship with its former ally, France, and needing to have full navigation rights on the Mississippi put them in a difficult spot with Spain. So when Jay agreed to accept the appointment as Foreign Secretary beginning in 1784, he also possessed a sound working knowledge of both diplomatic strife and the domestic vulnerabilities facing the new nation. Returning to New York in 1784, Jay retained a sober perspective concerning the persistent truculence of the three European powers toward the United States. Also because he served in the first two Continental Congresses before committing to a brief term as congressional president in 1748, Jay harbored reasonable assessment of the failings inherent in the Confederation government. Even during his tenure as minister in Spain between 1780 and 1782, Jay was aware that Spain desired to gain mercantile and political parity with France and Britain. Therefore, Spain consistently manipulated the United States, thwarting American attempts to consummate permanent access treaty for the navigation rights to the Mississippi River, and by denying American claims to Spanish Florida. In addition, Jay realized that the British would not honor their pledge in the Peace of Paris to cease military occupation of the Northwest unless the United States fulfilled its commitment to pay all of its private war debts owed to British creditors. What is more, the French impetuously had not signed the Peace of Paris. They had refused to recognize the United States as a sovereign entity. What fun! Because now France desired to undermine its recent Revolutionary War ally by negotiating consuls and treaties with each state separately. Jay saw this leading to complete chaos. The French foreign minister continued to offer an attempt to disrupt Spain's interaction with the United States. In conjunction with these urgents, the Barbary states had kidnapped American seamen. Because these North African districts were located in the French colonial sphere, the United States wanted Paris to intervene on its behalf to return its seamen, though the French government was reluctant to do so. Jay discerned the perfidious implications of these foreign policy rivals, held for domestic viability of the Confederation. Every weakness of the new government, economic, judicial, military, political, would be exploited. Without the power to raise national taxes, America would be weighted down indefinitely with debt owed to the British, while settling the Northwest would continue to be untenable. With no federal judiciary, France would find an array of opportunities to wedge itself into and between the states. With no reasonable facility for closing international treaties, Western settlers would face yet another lasting impediment to not being allowed to open use of the Mississippi to transport commodities. Pardon? Okay. I'm afraid this is going to happen. I just want to skip forward to Jay's relationship to a couple of the states here. One of the states he had the most trouble with was Massachusetts. He was constantly dealing with problems in Massachusetts concerning various controversies ranging from boundary disputes to clashes over navigation law. Jay began to feel that the economic turmoil in Massachusetts signaled dissolution of the Confederation. In November 1785, Rufus King, the Massachusetts delegate to Congress, related to Jay that everything was just fine. Massachusetts people had nothing but the best intentions. Jay didn't believe that, and he started in the spring of 1786. He was losing hope that the people of Massachusetts would ever find a legislative panacea for their dire economic problems. These problems eventually erupted into shady rebellion in 1787 with the inflation of Massachusetts currency, something that Jay had seen coming at least 2 years beforehand. He saw that no matter how much he tried to influence them to think of their national unity, the citizens of Massachusetts would inevitably pass laws to accede to their immediate ratification. He also, in his own state of New York, for example, sought to intercede in a negative way when he informed them that they could not sue the British government for confiscating property in New York State, the British confiscating property in New York State prior to the Treaty of Paris, because New York had not brought its laws into line with the post-Treaty of Paris period. So ultimately, Jay gave up on attempting to induce the states. His efforts to bring state law, use state law as a way to balance the inefficiencies of the Articles, did not have a lot of success. So as I mentioned at the beginning, he turned to harassing by mail Hamilton, Madison, Washington, and others to bring about the Constitutional Convention. Thank you.
Thank you.